Hey guys, welcome back to the Nick and Joe Show. I'm Nick, he's Joe, he's in Ottawa, and I am on the farm out here in the lovely Ottawa Valley. And it's getting to be that time of year where the weather's all over the place. And I was just reading a comment in the chat room where Mark Philippe was saying that he's got a crazy amount of sap flowing out of his trees right now because of the wildly fluctuating temperatures. So with any luck, it's going to be a great maple syrup year. And if you've got even one bone in your body is Canadian, you know you got to like maple syrup. Who doesn't like maple syrup? Anyway, so Mark Philippe, if you want to send us a sample so we can test it and see how, make sure the quality control is is up to snuff. We would be glad to provide that service for you. We'd only need about 10 gallons of it. So, just let us know when and where to pick it up. I'm kidding, of course. We'd only need 5 gallons. Anyway, one of the things I wanted to get into, Joseph, is I got this in the mail today from my member of parliament, Cheryl Gallant, who I think is doing a fine job as an MP. She's a backbencher, but she's a very good constituent MP. She takes her job seriously, and she's doing her best to keep us informed of what's going on with the different things available to her. But I got to ask myself, this document is called What the Conservatives Are Looking For in the Budget. And by the budget, they mean the Liberal budget.
Right, okay, the federal budget.
The first thing that comes to mind is it doesn't matter what you... Yeah, the federal budget, that's right. The first thing that comes to mind is it doesn't matter what you want, you're not going to get it, okay? But they list 57 items. Now, I am not going to read 57 items. But they have a few that are highlighted in here that I think are worth talking about. And point number 2, and Joseph, I'll get your input on this. They want to implement a plan to balance the budget in 10 years. Now, something doesn't square with this, with reality, Joseph. 10 years, I thought the budget was supposed to be balanced on a yearly basis.
Well, you try to balance... You try to balance the budget on a yearly basis. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. I'm not opposed to running a deficit. I'm opposed to institutional deficits. In other words, the kind of a deficit where you're chronically spending more money than you're bringing in revenue. But things happen, and it's not unusual that you're going to run a bit of a deficit and 1 year and maybe 2 years in a row or whatever, and then a couple of years in a row you'll run a surplus, and it all balances out over a period of time. But, when you read that to me, Nick, and I'm glad you did, because I wanted to talk a little bit about the budget in this segment, this part anyway, and that was because, we haven't had a budget in 2 years, which in itself is an oddity. But setting that aside for a minute, we're going to have a budget in the next couple of weeks federally, and the nonpartisan PBO, Parliamentary Budget Office, which is not preparing the budget that the government is going to present, they just comment on spending, and they're sort of like a spending watchdog. And they announced today that they think they're estimating that the deficit in this upcoming budget is going to be somewhere in the order of $363 billion. Now, you add on the $350-odd billion from last year's budget, or last year's non-budget, and in the last 2 years, we have added to the federal debt, forget provincial debt, forget municipal debt, we've just added to the federal debt somewhere in the order of $750 billion. $750 billion. Now, just to put that into perspective, if we were in the United States, and if we take a very rough calculation on a per capita basis, that would be somewhere in the order of $7.5 trillion in extra spending, in borrowing in 2 years, based on how they spend in the United States. So this is a massive, massive amount of adding to the federal debt. Now, what does this have to do with what you're mentioning now? Well, we'd like to see a balanced budget in 10 years. Well, there's something I don't get here, Nick. This north of $300 billion deficit is supposed to be including a lot of one-time spending in reaction to this pandemic. In other words, when the pandemic ends, some of this special spending, most of this special spending, should disappear. So what I don't get is why anyone would think that, let's say, next year our spending is going to be $250 billion over revenue, and the year after it'll be $200 billion, and the year after that it'll be down to $150 billion. And people are going to look at it and go, wow, the government's doing a great job moving towards balancing the budget. And I'm going, why is the budget more than $20 or $25 billion of deficit in 2022 or 2023 if the spending that we're talking about has been one-time spending? I mean, there's something fundamentally wrong with that math.
Yeah, I don't think it's you're right about the math, but I think that if you look at this a little deeper, this is just another way of increasing government programs, because you know that there's three things that you just can't get rid of. One is debt, the other one's taxes, and the third one is a government program. Once they institute them, like this whole idea about the CRB payment, okay, once you have people getting their $1,000 every 2 weeks from the government or $2,000 a month from the government, how is the government then going to turn around and say, sorry, you don't get it anymore? There'll be a hue and cry across the country because, and with some justification, hey, it's not my fault. You're the one who shut the economy down. You cost me my job. But the reality is that, they should do that, but will they? Who's going to have the kind of courage to be able to stand up and say, guess what, folks? You are going to have to go back to earning your own living. And it's just how it's going to happen, I got no idea. So there's a lot to be said for that. And when you see that's why the budget numbers tend to come down much more slowly than, okay, the program's run its course, it's dead, there's no more money. And, in a common sense kind of way, that's how these long-term institutionalized programs get started. And once they're started, oh man, it's like a drug addict. I don't want to do this, but I need the drugs to get through this. Then when you're through it, or, oh no, I need it. You don't know when to say enough is enough. And the person providing it to you hasn't got the courage to tell you you've had too much. So it's the same thing. That's what I read into that, is this whole idea of taking a program that's meant with all the best intentions and turning it into an ever-growing monster that needs to be fed increasing amounts of tax funds every year, because somebody's going to say, well, it's not enough, it's not enough, it's not enough. The next thing you know, you have cost of living built into it, you have all this other stuff built into it, and you've got a culture of dependency built in that you started with all the best intentions and now you can't get rid of.
The other problem with a 10-year plan is it's not a plan, because no government is the same government for 10 years, and no parliament can bind...
Well, that's also true.
There's no parliament that can bind a subsequent parliament. So in other words, on programming or spending or anything like that. So in other words, when you hear politicians talk about a 10-year plan, what they're basically saying is, I'm just kicking this down the road. And again, in fairness, not that I want to give my political party a black eye, but, they're talking about a 10-year, well, it's, as you've already read from Cheryl Gallant, we want a 10-year plan. And Aaron O'Toole is saying that the party's going to have a 10-year plan to balance the budget. Well, how often do you have a prime minister in office for 10 years? I mean, it's an anomaly. And so when you hear politicians talking about a 10-year plan
unusual
for anything, it's just not realistic. It's not based on reality. Give me a 5-year plan or a 4-year plan. I get elected. I have a majority government. I'm in office for 4 years, maybe as long as 5, but probably 4 years. So while I'm in office, this is what we're going to do. And maybe we're going to pay a political price for balancing the budget, but we have to do it. And the economy is not going to suffer greatly because of it, because remember, a lot of this spending was supposed to be just one-time spending. It's not supposed to be an ongoing thing. So, yes, you mentioned CERB, but CERB is only one program. And I take what you're saying, absolutely cutting people off of their CERB is going to be difficult because a lot of these people are not going to have jobs to go to right away. So, the difficulty in doing that, I quite understand. But that's not $300 billion a year. And we have other programs to help people. So it's just, on this, I'm just fit to be tied.
Yeah. Well, let me move on down into the document a little further. And this one is a fuzzy, feel-good, I have no idea how they're actually going to do this kind of thing. It's not the biggest point in here, but it's point 21. And it says, make home care and care more available across the country. Okay, so let's put some meat on those bones. How exactly do you plan on doing that? Palliative care requires a certain kind of individual because of the demands of the job. There's only so many people within a culture who can do that job. And that's true of a lot of jobs, by the way. Like only so many can be soldiers, only so many can be police, only so many can be, nurses or doctors. It takes a particular mindset and a certain level of compassion to be able to go into a palliative care situation and meet the most basic needs of the individual in question. Everything from getting them up in the morning to making sure that, they're fed. I almost said fed and watered. But they're fed and looked after and bathed and these kinds of things. And not everybody wants to do that. So how are you going to do that? Are you going to increase the salaries of the people who do it to make the trade more accessible? Okay, where is that money going to come from? All these things that's where the devil's in the details in these particular programs because there's no answers to these questions.
Yeah, just as importantly, forget about the dollars and cents for a moment and forget about the personnel perspective. This is healthcare. Healthcare is a provincial jurisdiction. Why is a conservative party...
That's also true.
Why is a conservative party wading into areas of provincial jurisdiction? I'm not... Don't get me wrong. I'm not against the 10 provinces coming together and saying, let's form an agreement and maybe pool our resources so that we have some sort of a national program that we've agreed to amongst ourselves. We don't have to involve the federal government. In fact, I hate the idea of involving the federal government because involving the federal government inevitably means going to the federal government with your hand out and saying, pay 25% of the bill for this, as if there's more than one taxpayer. Okay, I try to get it through people's head. There's only one taxpayer. There isn't a federal taxpayer and a provincial taxpayer. There's just taxpayers. So whether the money is coming from the federal government through your federal taxes, or it's your province that's paying the bill because of through the provincial taxes that you pay, one way or another, it's all coming from the same source. So I wouldn't even involve the federal government in this. I'd convene some sort of a convention or a conference of provincial health ministers, come together, forge an agreement, create some sort of a fund where you can share resources, agree on national standards, okay, and let's go ahead and have expanded palliative care, expanded home care, not just palliative care, but home care for people who are shut in. Those are all good things. I saw also, I don't know if it's in this brochure, but I know that they were talking about